Okay, thank you, and thanks for attending this session. So I'm going to be talking about a new platform for research in Africa. So first of all, I mean, it's hardly important to convince this audience about the importance of data, but particularly for health innovation. So we have human data, which provides an opportunity for improved knowledge on diseases, obviously potential for therapeutics, diagnostics, vaccines, etc. One of the important things here, though, is the lack of data on certain populations. And so the data is very specific to populations. For precision medicine, you really need increased data sets from underrepresented populations, particularly for, in our case, the African populations, which have very, very high genetic diversity and a lot of distinctions in the genome. So we really need more data to make novel health discoveries. And then, of course, we've all seen from COVID the importance of pathogen surveillance data for both tracking transmission, for tracking drug resistance, and really informing response. And here we saw a really good connection between academia and public health, as you've just heard. But then there's all the other data types out there. You know, there's microbiome, there's omics data. We can think about plants, animals, sort of the One Health picture. And then there's even more data. So these are electronic health records. These are much harder to now access and bring in and integrate. There's image data, there's environmental data, socioeconomic data, and actually all of these data types connect and are factors in determining health and determining how we respond to health. And these can generate novel discoveries for health. So we need collaboration, as I said, between academia and public health, and of course industry as well, for translating that to real benefits. And we need multidisciplinary data types, integration tools, and then the skills to be able to do all this. So this requires a robust data infrastructure and of course the tools. We also require that the data gets shared responsibly. And then the data really gets converted to knowledge. So we've been running the H Africa project for 10 years now, and it's generated a lot of novel discoveries. But where's the health benefit? We need the integration of all these other different data types and knowledge and tools to really get a product that is relevant to somebody who gave their sample in the first place 10 years ago to improve our knowledge on diseases. And the challenges for us, particularly in middle income countries, but I think generally, is the limited data infrastructure, very heterogeneous data sets, and particularly the fact that a lot of these data sets, because they're connected to human or because there's some connection to benefit, potential benefit or IP, is the sharing and the openness of the data and the governance under which these data sets are controlled. So if we think about the data infrastructure that's required, it's not just about the analysis, the access and the analysis and the interpretation. When you think about every piece of that puzzle, it's the capture, the generation, just moving data. Try moving data in Africa. It's not simple. Curating the data, processing it, doing the QC. As soon as we try to integrate metadata, clinical data, you find that actually there's a huge amount of cleaning and QC to be done before you can use that data. So every one of these pieces is really challenging in resource-limited settings, so we need training associated with that. The other thing, as I said, is the issue of data governance and data being able to move across different borders and even just to move away from a particular institution. And so there's this idea, which the Dutch group, the DTL group, came up with many years ago of data visiting. So this is the personal health train, where you have a little train that goes around and visits data sets. So the data sets don't move, and you only get to visit that data set and use that data set when you are authorized to do so. So this requires some good knowledge of the metadata, some potentially through having a good metadata model or harmonization of the data, being able to find and access that data, and then being able to use it, so being able to push your tools to that. So the ideal scenario we want is, if data sets can't move and you don't want to go to EGA and download every massive data set, you want to be able to get your own data set, think about what other data sets are out there, be able to find them through some sort of search. That search should also indicate what you can use those data sets for. So we use the data use ontology. This is coming out the GF4GH. And then once you've been granted access to a data set, be able to just, instead of downloading the entire data set, send your tools to the data using all the GA4GH, this is the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health, using all those standards and then return just the results. And so one of the projects that I've been working with that has done some of this is the Cynica project. It's actually just finished about a month ago after a few years. It was an EU-funded project. And there we looked at building tools for federated discovery, and again, using a lot of the GA4GH standards. Then thinking about how once you've found the data sets, how you can access them using some sort of authorization and authentication infrastructure, having those data sets harmonized so that once you do have access to them, you can actually use them and do a meta-analysis on them, have the tools to do this federated analysis and to do all this within an ELSI framework. So this is one of the projects that we sort of started gaining experience in federated data analysis. But then a new project, a new initiative started, funded by the National Institutes of Health, and this is the DSR Africa Consortium. It stands for Harnessing Data Science for Health Discovery and Innovation in Africa. And the idea was to take existing data sets, not just your traditional genomics and phenotype, but all other data sets, including climate, image data, etc., use data science techniques and generate novel health discoveries, so actual health benefits. And so there are a set of funded projects, including research hubs, training grants, ELSI grants, and then the Open Data Science Platform and Coordinating Center, which is what I lead. And this is to build a platform. We call this eLwazi, which is also a word for knowledge or information. And it's an African-led platform. So the kind of projects that we're trying to service here, the ELSI projects are quite diverse. The research projects include things like, so the HEAT project is looking at the impact of heat and other climate parameters on maternal and child health. There's some groups looking at, the Inform Africa project is looking at HIV, COVID, and other comorbidities. The project's looking at antimicrobial resistance, injury, surgery, etc. So there's a very diverse group of projects, but they're not just using traditional data sets. They're using image data, climate data, environmental data, socioeconomic data, etc. There's a set of ELSI projects also looking at the governance with respect to the use of data science for health in African settings. And then there's some training grants building new data science degrees. So the Open Data Science Platform has to manage the data, so the metadata, harmonizing the data, helping them to decide where to store the data, bringing the data together, and really this integration part, which is actually a big kind of global challenge. Getting the tools that are required. These are really now data science tools. People are moving out of their comfort zone of your normal genomics tools. Providing the computing infrastructure. As I said, every piece of that is challenging in resource-limited settings, and then providing training. And so there are a number of ways that we're doing this. So the eLwazi, the Open Data Science Platform, is a collaboration of 7 African partners. So these are ones that came out of the H3A BioNet project. This is a Pan-African Bioinformatics Network that I was running. We've got 3 partners in the US and the EBI. So what we wanted to be able to enable was that people could, these different projects could store their data sets in different places. They'd have access to tools. The data was all indexed. So a user could come along, find the data sets, decide whether they have access to them or get access to them, identify the tools they need, and then run that on a particular environment. So when we were developing the proposal, there's this data biosphere concept that was out there already. So it's a very similar architecture. And this, in fact, has already been implemented in several platforms. This includes the Terra platform produced by the Broad Institute, Gen3, and then, of course, we have DocStore that has all the open source, the workflows and tools. And these have been used, these platforms have been used for implementation in particular projects, including the All of Us project, the Anvil, etc. So the number of Human Cell Atlas, etc. So there are a number of high-profile projects that use the same infrastructure. So it's not a novel concept, this architecture that we wanted to use. And these all use GA4GH standards. So those who are not familiar with GA4GH, it's Global Alliance for Genomics and Health, and they build the tools to enable responsible human data sharing. And there are a few people from GA4GH who I noticed who are recognized in the audience. So they built a number of standards, some of which we're using for this platform. So on the data side, basically the idea is that you have your data sets that can be stored in different places, and they can be of very different types. So genomics data, image data, phenotype data, etc. These then get indexed, so that the metadata gets indexed for a catalog, a browsable catalog. But the information for about these data sets is available via the data repository service. And then, so the idea is that when a user comes in, they can identify the data sets through the metadata about those projects, find the data sets, and then think about the tools. So the tools are all available. We've got a tools working group that builds the workflows. We build containerized workflows where they don't already exist. But now we're bringing in all the AI, all the sort of more data science related tools. These are accessible via Jupyter Notebooks or via simple web interface. And then these can all be executed using the GA4GH WES, the workflow execution service. And here, this is on various cloud environments. So what we found in Africa is that, and I think it's not novel, I think it's not unusual, because when I say, oh, in Africa, we have a big problem with using the cloud, everybody says, well, so do we. So it's not necessarily a unique situation, but the cloud is not big in Africa. There's a cost issue, there's the internet issue, there's electricity issues, you name it. So we have to think about, good ways that we can combine with those who can use the cloud, because we have got clouds coming in. We now have an AWS and Microsoft in Cape Town. So they're all coming into Africa. And this is particularly for people who don't want to physically see their data sets sitting in a cloud in the US. So they want their data sets in a cloud in Africa. And we're working with the astronomy community, actually, who's building a big African open science cloud to make sure that there is physical presence of the cloud on the continent. But we also want to make on-premise solutions available as well. So the idea, so we've got an implementation. This is the Terra implementation. You log into a workspace. The projects can then look at the different data sets there through a catalog in the registry, extract the data sets, find the tools in DocStore, and then run them on the various environments. And then this can then be shared. But what we want to work towards is the fact that Terra is very tied to GCP. It's Google now, they're busy working with Azure to get it up and running there. Gen 3 is tied to AWS, or it's available on-premise. We want this to be agnostic to the user. So the user doesn't want to have to think about, do I have to put my data set in AWS and the other data set's now sitting in GCP? What do I do? So we want them to be able to come into an eLwazi workspace that sits outside of the cloud, outside of the computing environment. The catalog sits outside of that computing environment. They can find everything they need to know about those data sets. And then there's a clever system that just says, this is where your data sets are sitting. So you find the data sets, no matter where they are, you can extract those data sets, find the tools you want, and then run them in whatever compute environment. So if your electronic health, if your phenotype data is in an EHR in your own, under your desk, and something else is in AWS, but another data set's on-premise in Uganda, we want them to be able to do federated analysis and computing on those data sets. So we protect the data sets, but we provide the technical implementation to do that. So we've just had a GA4GH workshop in Cape Town. I missed it because I was away, but we're learning how in Africa how to implement this for African solutions. So our progress to date is we have a website, we have the Terra implementation, and we've got a workspace there that's implemented pathogen surveillance. So our group, people who've been following COVID would know Tulio in South Africa. He's the one who found the Omicron variant, one of the people who found the Omicron. And so their project is in here. He's one of the partners on here. So they're now using this for their sort of big collaborative projects on COVID. We've got a Gen 3 implementation on our cluster at UCT. We're busy implementing that in Uganda, and we'll implement that in Mali as well, so that we have distributed versions of these. We've explored different data models, so we put a lot of effort so far into getting all the different data types from these groups. One of the biggest challenges, though, is these data, the individual projects are trying to themselves pull data sets from multiple different places to harmonize, to then harmonize again to work with the other projects. So it's like a big spider web. And each of these is a different governance. So what we're trying to work out with the governance group is who owns the process data. Is everybody still, so the data for the DSI consortium, is that going to be under different governance because every single individual data set from which those data sets were derived have their own governance structure? So that's one of the networks of complications we're working on. We've got fair maturity models for each project to make sure that all the data types, all the data is fair. We've got a basic data catalog up and running. We've got a catalog jamboree coming up to expand this. So we have the basic platform up and running. We're also thinking about capacity development. So we're developing data science training, a flagship data science for biomedical sciences course for the African groups. We've been working on training across Africa for many years through HFSP. We've trained about 4,000 people through distributed classroom models. And so we're going to implement this for the data science training. So we've got a set of, we're developing a set of competencies for data science for biomedical sciences, and we're developing a curriculum around that. So the overall intended outcomes of this platform and the project are to develop data science infrastructure for Africa that is applicable to the continent, to get the data and the metadata cleaned, accessible, harmonized, with clear governance, so we can do federated analysis, to enable African scientists to analyze these data sets in Africa on African computing infrastructure, and to develop the data science skills to do that. So this all needs to be feasible in an African setting. Infrastructure in many places is great. Infrastructure in Africa has many holes. Sometimes we have to build the infrastructure before we get going. So that's why we're often a little bit further behind. But once we have this, really rolled out, I think there are many applications. We've had a lot of interest from the Africa Biogenome Project, from all sorts of other applications which require collaborative analysis of data sets that might be sitting in different places. And so we think that there's a reasonable future for this platform. So I'd like to acknowledge these are the partner institutions for eLwazi. HFSP Consortium is actually the foundation on which all of this was built, and our funding, which comes from the NIH, and our SAB. We've got an SAB member here who helped keep us in line. So thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Nicola. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah.
Hi, Miki. Thank you so much for your talk. This is an incredible project. And I am wondering, so I'm learning a lot, and we're working on our own implementations for another big project in the US. And I'm wondering if you could share, if any, what considerations for the ethical capture and acquisition of the data itself were done, or if eLwazi at all considers how the data originates before it even gets into your platform, if this is a point of thought.
Yeah, so that's difficult because it's already a secondary data set. So in Africa, these were projects that were generating data themselves. They were getting the participants, they were generating the data. So as we were much closer to that origination, the origin of the data. In this case, they're trying to get data sets that already exist, pull those data sets together and process them to create their own new data set. But the data governance is having to go back to the origin and say, well, we have to make sure that whatever the original consent was is captured all the way down the line. But when you look at data access agreements, there's a lot there about, when they talk about IP and that once it's processed, it's a different story. So, but there's no definition of how processed does the data set have to be before it loses that original. Yeah. So those are things that we've been grappling with. And in fact, the LC projects are doing a great job. We've got lawyers, we've got ethics people. They're all looking at what is the legislation around this. And I still don't think there's going to be a definition of processed. So it is a very big problem, but we're trying to go back to the origin about, the capture, and because sometimes you have to go back there to clean the data and, to get the real context, because the data sets lose context, as you move along too, as well as the governance. So there's a lot to consider.
Hi, Nikki. I have the next question. Looking at everything what's going on already now in Africa, isn't it time to think about an African Institute of Bioinformatics for competency, capacity, trust? I mean, to be partners in INSTC, in WWPDB, in all of these efforts, EGA, federated EGA, isn't it not time? It doesn't need to be at one place, it can be federated, but I think the world is waiting for you there.
So, Rolf, I think you've read the documents, because actually we're doing exactly that, both of those. We have put together a business plan for an African Institute of Bioinformatics. We've already had a discussion with several funders. And so we actually have a meeting later in August to actually get one of those up and running, where there's a real services project. We've also applied for an NIH grant, which we've been told is, they never can say 100%, it's 99%. They say, we're preparing the NOA for an African genomics data hub. And that's taking forward all of these sort of major international repositories, international-like repositories that are for African data. So we've spoken to Thomas, we've got federated EGA incorporated into that. We've even spoken to the NCBI about a potential federated DB-GAP. And then, so we've also had, I think, initial discussions with Guy, at recent events about a potential INSTC. The different models, federated EGA is where you have just your data there. INSTC is a mirror, so you have to, it's everybody's data, so we have to look at the models. And the question I asked Joe is the sustainability. That would be a 5-year grant. We'd need to make sure that we have sustainability, that we can really do it because EBI has been going for a long time, 24/7 they're up. They don't have load shedding like South Africa does, where they just cut the power for 2 hours. So it's all in the pipeline.